CBS announced that The Late Show with Stephen Colbert ends in May 2026, putting a spotlight on the new economics of reaching mass audiences and challenging the supremacy of celebrity TV hosts. Some say it's the death of networks' late-night relevance in a streaming world. Some say it's political. CBS just says it's business. What do you think?
Stephen Colbert didn't just get canceled. He got downsized for cheaper workers. And just to understand how CBS looks at this from a mathematics point of view. So reportedly, it cost about $40 million to run that show. It had an average audience of about 10 million people per month, which means about 120 million people in a year. So if you run the numbers through, the CPM, which is what's used in the industry to price ads and exposure, is about $333 per 1,000 people is what it costs to run Stephen Colbert's show. Now, you may say, is that a lot? Is that a little? What is it worth? Well, let's compare to another big time celebrity, different exposure. Now, Joe Rogan, who hosts the biggest podcast in the world, reportedly, he earns about a $30 million salary to host that show. It doesn't have all of the production costs, the 200 people that Stephen Colbert had. It has about a 16 million monthly audience. That's 192 million people a year. Its CPM is $156. So Stephen Colbert was twice as expensive to reach the same audience as Joe Rogan. He's just too expensive. And if you just run numbers through, and I realize like a show that is hosted is different than other exposures, but what is, if you sponsor an F1 car, it costs about $20 million, it reaches 1.2 billion people. That's about a $17 CPM. If you run a Super Bowl ad, costs you $7 million, reaches 115 million people, that's about a $61 CPM. So Stephen Colbert at over $300 was incredibly expensive. And that's because basically a late night show does not have the audience it shouldn't anymore. So yes, it is some of the economics of changing to more digital distribution, and it's also just a show that was far too expensive to produce. In this era, when production costs are going down, with AI is automating things, if you have a cost structure from a different era, like The Late Show did, you will not make it.
What's the political connection to this over there in the States? Why are people pulling Trump? I know people like pulling Trump into every possible story they can, but why is he related to this story specifically? Do you?
Well, yes, it's because 3 days before this happened, Stephen Colbert came out and said his employer is taking a bribe. They had a settlement with President Trump because they need a merger and acquisition to be approved by the U.S. government. They sort of settled with Trump, made a payout, and he talked about this. What I would say is, who knows what was going on behind closed doors at CBS, but it certainly didn't help. The economics were already not working out, and if you're gonna sort of criticize your employer in a very headline-making way, that probably doesn't help. Now, what's the mitigating factor? This form of late-night talk show host, it's like famous for criticizing your employers. Like the king of that was David Letterman, right? Who was famous for making jokes and calling his employers like weasels and all of these things. But I think, they're smart enough to sort of take this in stride. Like this is kind of the art format. Like people like seeing people, people like complaining about their boss. So it's another example of that. So that in itself to me was not like career killing, but it probably doesn't help when you're like, hey, we're losing money on you, reported tens of millions of dollars every year. You just criticized us. We're losing money every episode. Maybe we don't need you.
I think that change, obviously we all know, unless you're in denial. Obviously the major networks already know this, but YouTube is the biggest TV network in the world now. It has been probably for a little while. Do you think we're witnessing the death of mainstream media?
Maybe mainstream media is no longer mainstream media. Mainstream media, Tom, is like what you see on TikTok and YouTube Shorts and what is spreading across the blogosphere. That is mainstream media.
Do you think there's going to be a domino effect with this? Do you think Jimmy Fallon is next, or is it John Oliver or whoever the other, James Corden, all these guys? Do you think they're next?
I think it's going to be determined by basically mainstream media now is digital in its nature of distribution. And so it's going to depend on those shows, which reportedly have a bigger online footprint than Stephen Colbert. But basically, what's now is going to be determined is Jimmy Fallon more Joe Rogan or Mr. Beast, or is Jimmy Fallon more David Letterman and Jay Leno? Jimmy Fallon is going to need to channel his YouTube star, influencer star, and he probably has a lot of skills that could do that. But basically, those shows to stay in existence are going to have to become, digital juggernauts. That's what's going to determine it.
Okay, so we're going to respond to a few comments. Now, I'm just going to read them out to you, Ben. If you have an answer, let me know. @Brad says, these numbers are imaginary. The Colbert Report does about 90 episodes per year at about 1.2 million per episode. That's close to 100 million per season. The ad revenue is 200K to 1 million per 30-second spot. You have 22 minutes of available ad space in a show. Your eCPM numbers are all way off.
Appreciate the calculation. We're doing more of a back of the envelope calculation. And what I can say is that like premium CPMs for premium spots can run as high as $40. We weren't calculating all of the like potential impressions they could have in an episode, but I would argue that Joe Rogan, which was the comparison, that Joe Rogan, despite being incredibly well paid, is a better deal than Stephen Colbert because of his production costs. He can also run multiple impressions in his episodes. He could mimic Stephen Colbert's, and probably he has more territory to do it in because the Colbert Show, short compared to podcast Joe Rogan, quite long, and he has a potential because of the nature of podcasting to actually do more episodes. So we could probably debate back and forth and say how many impressions are actually in there, but just keeping things to do this comparison, basically Joe Rogan, half the price of Stephen Colbert because of the production cost, and he has more exposure. That's definitely true.
Okay, second one on calculations. Big Tweezy's Q for Life says, flawed calculations. What about income for advertising and viewership?
Income for advertising and viewership, I don't totally get that one, but certainly what I'd say is that the income aside, if you're talking about income besides advertising, that is true. The problem is that just goes more in Joe Rogan's favor. Stephen Colbert is not known for being a prolifically shared social media figure in the way that Jimmy Fallon is. So that's another reason why he got downsized. High cost, high production, less social reach. Joe Rogan gets shared more.
@Jar says, obviously a one-man podcast is going to cost less to run than a television show with an audience, a band, producers, and so forth. That's not news.
That actually is the news, which is that these high production cost shows are going to really struggle because in the attention economy, you can get attention without all of that production. I mean, here's an example, Tom. It's like the difference between you could go film a big budget alien action movie that costs, $500 million to produce, or you could potentially go, if you remember back in the day, like the Blair Witch Project movie, right? Which was like handheld, inexpensive. I think it was under $100,000. And the problem is you can still make money doing the $500 million movie, but you better make sure that you get a ton of attention, a ton of eyeballs to justify that cost, because you can also do this, getting attention, holding up your iPhone to yourself and just talking as well. So in the attention economy, if you're going to spend, you better make sure you get reach and return for that spend. In Stephen Colbert's case, he just can't justify it.
@Capped Broadway says, calling Joe Rogan a big-time celebrity is telling.
I think he's a big-time celebrity at this point. I would put him at least as well known as Stephen Colbert, wouldn't you? I don't think we have to debate that.
That's kind of a nothing comment. He absolutely is a big time celebrity. The biggest podcaster in the world, a UFC MMA commentator, like martial artist, comedian.
But I think what's telling is that he comes up in a conversation when we debate what happened in the 2024 election between Trump and Kamala Harris. He is a central figure in whether she went on that show or not. And Trump did, she didn't. I mean, we can debate the merits of that, but I think at this point he is a celebrity influencer at the highest level.
Okay, well, forgive me for this username. User 30919222354 says Colbert was not doing late night comedy. He was doing left-wing political show.
I think a fair comment that it had a certain point of view. What I think is just interesting is he was doing a expensive show that probably leaned a bit to the left. And I just think our point is that the economics of that are not going to work moving forward unless you have outsized attention and reach that is different than what you can get from a low production show. And I think, sort of having a focus that appeals to a certain member of the political spectrum, I think that's fine. You can have a niche core audience, but it is also going to shrink your audience a little bit. So that probably did not work in Stephen Colbert's favor in this. Fair point. I'd maybe diffuse it a little bit, but I get the point.
And the final, another comment, not the final one because there were hundreds, but there's the ones that we picked. Another user has a long string of numbers after it. One guess, podcasts at least have the possibility of being honest, uncensored, and not controlled by the mass media.
Which I think is a fair point in just the democratization of media. I mean, I think Stephen Colbert his sort of cancellation is a byproduct of that. Like, media is much more democratic. If you're, in every point, and I think even just how a social media has trended, right, Tom? It's like we used to say, hey, how many followers you had was going to matter. But now we know that, hey, we can do a segment, put it on TikTok and get 40,000 people watching and hundreds of comments, based on the content. So I think that is the biggest change right now, is that it is more democratic. It is less controlled. It is more of a meritocracy. The only difference is it's a meritocracy based on the attention you can get. Doesn't mean you have to be right, but you do have to be talked about.
That's all the comments we're going to answer right now. The comments are still ongoing currently because as the views rack up. So if more come up, perhaps we'll mention them next week. But if you guys out there watching this have any comments on today's stories, please let us know. Drop them in the comments down below. See you next week.
Cheers.